BeatMaker, and welcome to Lounge Rōnin. All things, everything. And before we get into it, if you are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button and welcome and ring that notification bell and subscribe. And on this episode, we're going to discuss mainstream academia and the lost race of giants. Part 2. Now, if you didn't catch part 1, which we did on Thursday, no worries, no worries. Essentially, I'll do a quick little synopsis, but essentially, we essentially went over the fact that the mainstream academia are well aware of the existence of giants. And I've done multiple episodes discussing this. And the more and more articles I read from researchers and interviews and podcasts and what have you, the more and more I am convinced that there was at a time a separate, or I should say an extinct civilization that lived on North America that may have primarily been occupied at one point by giants. So, and I know what I'm saying, it sounds, ridiculous, but, I'm one to believe in, well, I wasn't always, I should preface, but I'm now at a point where, I am one to believe a lot of the biblical stories and even the mythical stories, because how often does it tend to be that they end up being true? And I love this wonderful quote from Star Wars, and it goes, "There's always a bit of truth in legends." And the irony about what we're talking about right now is it's not necessarily even based on, well, partially is based on legends, but it's mostly based on verified archaeological artifacts and digs. And I know that may sound fantastical, but like I like the title states, it's been hidden in plain sight. And we're gonna get into that in part 2. And without further ado, let's get into it. Give me one quick second. Yeah, let me just take care of something real quick. Okay. All right, let me get this open. Okay, there's my mouse. All right, let's do it. All right, okay. All right, here we have the article was written by Jason and Sarah in May 24th, 2015. They wrote part one, and it's titled The Establishment Has Already Acknowledged a Lost Race of Giants, part two. And above we have a picture of what looks like a scale to human to giant ratio. And I'm one of those type of people that when I see things like that, um, you I don't think that people of that time and era were writing things of their imagination. I believe that they wrote what they saw and experienced. But that's just me personally. Following our overview of discoveries of gigantic humanoid skeletons and burial mounds and associated graveyards of the Adena Hopewell Arcanic cultures and Southeastern ceremonial complex, we will now document the discovery of the unique physical types UPTs, even after the institution of the mainstream policy of denial or post cover up. Now, how funny is it that we have UFOs, UAPs. I know there's like an underwater one, and now we got UPTs for unique physical types. It's these acronyms keep on getting more and more interesting. The two preeminent Adena scholars of the 20th century were William S. Webb, assisted by Charles Snow of the University of Kentucky, and Don Drago of the Carnegie Museum. When the Webb excavated the Dover Mound in Manson County, Kentucky, he encountered a group burial of 4 skeletons, one of which represented the unique physical type. The remains of the 40 burial is one of the largest known to Adena. The skull root field measurement is 84 inches, 7 feet tall. The Dover Mound, William S. Webb and Charles Snow. End quote. The burial census table mentions that this skeleton had a very thick skull and represented the tallest Adena male from the mound. For the other burials in the Dover Mound, the table includes such details as a prominent bilateral chin, rugged head and face, wide bilateral chin, and high vaulted large face. The Dover Mound also yielded skeletons with dental abnormalities. Burial 54 included a supramalar tooth with twin cusps lying diagonally in the left maxilla, as well as shovel-shaped later incisors. Recently recorded instances of Adena superomi teeth occur at McCurry Mound 1 and Seidner Mound 1 in Ohio. Mortuary availability in the Middle Big Derby drainage of central Ohio between 300 BC and 300 AD, Volume 1, Bruce Unment. One particular monstrous deformation analyzed and photographed in the Ohio archaeologists may be an extreme case of the type of dental anomalies found in the Dover Mound. Ohio archaeologists of the 10th of October, 1960. Webb and Snow also noted the large crania adena, which they partly attributed to head boarding. Now, I personally am going to push back on the headboarding concept. The only reason why I'm going to push back on it is mostly because of the fact that that is something that, granted, there is a substantial amount of evidence to prove of cranial deformation. However, I would have to remind people uh, um, I would have to remind people that when we look at some of the more older work, and I did a live stream covering this, but if we look at the work done by various archaeologists in 1800s and scientists and doctors who studied bones in the 1800s, when they went to Peru and Bolivia, they had uncovered elongated skulls. Now, I know that what they're saying here is that they are under the impression that these giants had elongated skulls. And their skulls were uh, deformed on purpose. Now, here's how you can tell whether or not that's the case. And they don't seem to be bringing up that matter of fact, what I'm about to say. And that is essentially that during the work of Brian Forrester and others, and the researchers from the 1800s, what they essentially noticed is that when it comes to the human skull, we have a suture bone in the back of our skull. It's this line. And this indicates a human skull. When it comes to the skulls of these elongated humanoids in Peru and Bolivia and Central America, what have you, they do not have the suture bone in the back. And that in and of itself is very indicative of what you're essentially dealing with. And what I mean by that is that suture bone in particular will tell you if you are dealing with a human or not. And what we have documented time and time again in regards to these elongated skulls that are located in Central America, and I can't really say anything in regards to the elongated skulls that are found in Russia, Japan, France, Africa, I'm not necessarily sure about those. So, but what I can tell you about the ones in Central America is that they don't have the suture bone that human skulls have in the back. So that's why I would push back on this whole concept of cranial deformation. And and we get into it further into the article, but like I'm really under the impression that and we even covered this in part one, but and you're gonna see a photo, or I should say a reimagining of what these Hopewell mound giants look like, and it's just very telling to me that there is no forced cranial deformation. This is natural. And when you look at the work of Brian Forster and when you compare these elongated skulls that do not have the suture bone as we do, it's apparent that you are looking at a separate species of humans. And I'm not sure whether or not we can call giants a separate species of humans, but the smaller versions, the ones that are located in Central America, they're not giants. They're of average size. So that's why, like I said, uh, I'm more than willing to push back on the concept of cranial deformation when there is plenty of evidence to prove otherwise. So that's just kind of what I wanted to say real quick about that. All right, let's get back into it. So, quote: not only do the Dover people show the results of head shaping, but they exceeded the total Kentucky series in the great width and height of the skull vault. It is to be noted that the head shaping has been extreme in these skulls. These people as a group have the highest skull vaults reported anywhere in the world. End quote. Now, like I was saying, they're not really, I just don't think it's head shaping. I really don't. Um, it was something that was practiced, but the people who practice head shaping, they practice it to emulate uh, elites, people who they deemed as higher than them. Now you would have to ask yourself, where did they get that inspiration from in order to be willing to purposely deform an infant's head to copy and emulate these elites? So that's just something to keep in mind. So in the picture we have here, we have what is an artist reconstruction of the high skull vault reported in the descriptions of North American giants. So and when I see this image, they look very reminiscent to the indigenous Indians. Or I shouldn't really say indigenous Indians, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We'll address that later on. But they also remind me of the various tribes that you would see in Central America. So I'm wondering if, and we don't necessarily know, but um, whether they migrated from Central America and South America to North America. I don't. There hasn't been any evidence to point to that so far that I've seen. But in part one, uh, and we do cover the construction and some of the layouts of these mound cities, and it's pretty eye opening. And it just further points to the evidence and notion of a worldwide civilization. uh, and that's how I feel about it personally. And there, on like I said, there's plenty of evidence to prove of a worldwide civilization. But many people don't want to buy into it because, as this live stream is titled, it goes against, mainstream academia, it goes against the narrative. Another feature of UPTs documented by Webb and Snow is the massive lower jaw. One of the outstanding and un-Indian traits present among the Adena people is their prominent and often bilateral chins. One of the skulls from the Dover Mound, Burial 25, represents a bilateral chin with a width of 52 millimeters. End quote. One of the particular features present in at least one half of the observed examples is the great width of the bony chin, formed by bilateral eminences rarely found among the skulls of the much earlier Shell Heap people or among the later Hopewell people. End quote. Besides the large skeletal type, Snow noted the discovery of the dwarf type mentioned in earlier literature in his observations of the famous Adena pipe from Ross County, Ohio. Quote, further evidence of abnormal Adena individuals is portrayed in a remarkable piece of sculpture in the round the Adena pipe figurine. The figure depicted is typical of this form of dwarfism. End quote. Now, here we have the pipe. And it does look very reminiscent to an individual that would have dwarfism. Or, it's very reminiscent of the pygmy people. Who, were essentially, hobbits. They were human hobbits. I know, as wild as that may sound. But what's interesting about that is there's a lot of stories and evidence to suggest that such species of human was prolific around various areas of the world. Whether it's down in that island in Indonesia. I believe they may have even, as we're seeing in this article, populated North America. And this is what's so funny about it is kind of like when we look at our uh, mythology, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, whatever it may be, there's always the idea and the notion that there is a little bit of truth to it, and more kind of like in the sense of like we have it in our our films, our media, this idea of drop sharing. And I think that that's something that drop sharing. What's it called? I can't even think of the word. It escaped my brain. But essentially, um, they will essentially kind of just put seeds of information out, little grains of truth. And oftentimes those grains of truth have a lot of levity behind them. And in my mind, you see a lot of that with our media, with our films. They will tend to put out some information about whether it's technology, whether it's agendas, whether it's cultural agendas, and then the next thing you know, it's like full blown in your face. And you can look at that right now with what's kind of going on with a lot of the UAP talks and the committees that are being held, and whether or not it's a psyop. I'm not here to have that discussion and tell you whether that is the case or not. But for me personally, the way that I'm interpreting much of this information is that they're telling us the truth more often than not. It's right in front of us. uh, we tend to be ignorant to that truth. And I'm not trying to sound all like woo woo here, but it's definitely something that we got to take into consideration. And there's nothing wrong with taking time and doing your own research. And even the information that I'm sharing with you right now as I speak, there's nothing wrong with taking time and doing your own research. And part of what's wonderful about these articles and information that I'm sharing with you is there's actual data, there's references. You can take time and look back and research this stuff for yourself. And you can tell that i'm not talking out I'm not talking out my ass. That's the reason why this stream smells so fresh. And this is one of the many issues that we have in regards to people talking about conspiracies and mythology and legends as if it's truth, because sometimes they don't tend to present you enough evidence or data. And sometimes they don't even really need to, they just tell you and then it ends up happening. And we've kind of seen that with the last 3 to 4 years. But what's more funny about this evidence and data in regards to giants is that it's right in front of us. There's no mistaking it, there's no denying it. That's what I think is really fascinating about it. And especially when it comes to artifacts. Incredible. The next text references the excavation of one of these individuals at Waverly, Ohio. The following description of this burial is from Gerald Folk. Quote, "A skeleton of peculiar form. It is not over 5 feet long, but the bones were very thick, and the processes for attachment of muscles were extraordinary in their development. The skull was nearly half an inch thick and of unusual size, mostly back of the ears. Though the forehead was full and high, the teeth were large and hard, and but little worn." End quote. Now notice here in Gerald's research, there's no mentioning or indicating that these skulls were deformed on purpose. So I just want you to keep in mind of that note. And let's continue. In 1958, Don Drago encountered the large Adena type while excavating the Crescent Mound in West Virginia on behalf of the Carnegie Museum. In a subfloor tomb, he unearthed burial 54. Quote, "The individual was of large proportions. When measured in the tomb, his length was approximately 7.0 feet. All along the bones were heavy and possessed marked eminences for attached muscles." End quote. And here you go again. Just, like I said, I'm just here to provide you the evidence, and it is up to you to decide on how you want to perceive that evidence. But it's right there for you. And here we have a burial mound of the Adena culture, Grave Creek Mound in Moundsville, West Virginia. Now, I did do a two-part live stream discussing the mounds in West Virginia, mostly the discussing the burial mounds, and how these giants were buried in those mounds. It's very interesting. And as of now, I really recommend you check out part one after part two, because we go into some of the burial techniques of the giants in part one of this series, and it's very interesting. I don't want to spoil it, but it's very reminiscent of another culture somewhere else in the world. But let's continue. A burial, yeah, okay, we got that. All right, here we go. This discovery, as well as a review of Webb's earlier work at the Dover Mound, influenced Drago's remarkable observations on Adena anthropology. Quote, two outstanding traits have been noted repeatedly for this group. One is a protruding and massive chin, often with prominent bilateral protrusions. Bilateral protrusions. The second trait is the large size of many of the males and some of the females. A male of 6 feet was common, and some individuals approaching 7 feet in height have been found. For example, burial 40 in the Dover Mound and burial 54 in the Crest Mound. Some of the females in the Dover Mound also were more than 6 feet in height. Not only were these Adena people tall, but also the massiveness of the bones indicates powerfully built individuals. The head was generally big with a large cranial capacity. End quote. So the Adena people, and then then later on possibly the Hopewell people, and I believe, was it in part one of this series, I believe, or it may have been in the West Virginia series, that some of these burial mounds were found with one male, a giant, so to speak, because he was 7 feet tall, and like a female, and she's 5 feet tall. So there may have been, in my personal opinion, interbreeding. I don't necessarily know if the female had an elongated skull or not, but let's say she didn't. There was clearly some interbreeding going on. Let's continue. To Webb, Snow, and Drago, the evidence clearly pointed towards the existence of a group of genetically related elites within the Adena sphere who shared the UP traits. The true number of these individuals has been obfuscated by the common practice of cremation. Quote, if, as the evidence seems to indicate, the burials of the tombs were those of a selected group, which factors would have undoubtedly been of importance not only in the development of the prominent chin, but also in the large stature. If only certain inbreeding individuals of the total population were members of the selected group, genetic factors would have also played an important part in the establishment of the unique Adena physical type. How widespread throughout the entire Adena population were the unique traits of the tomb burials is unknown, but no study of the cremated remains from the Dover Mound indicated that at least some of the individuals among these cremated remains also possessed the unique traits of the flesh burials in the tombs. Because of the common practice of cremating most of the dead, we will probably never be able to determine the full extent of these special traits in the general population. End quote. Now, I don't know if there's any evidence to prove that inbreeding creates elongated skulls. So, I may push back on that a little bit. And I could be wrong. Maybe they were able to. Actually, I don't even think they were able to. I don't think they even have the technology yet to tell. But I mean, they're saying here genetic factors also played an important part. But I don't know if they necessarily were able to confirm that they were inbreeding. That may have possibly been a guess, a speculation. But I could be wrong. But I just don't think that was the case, because I don't really think inbreeding creates elongated skulls. And we already know and have already confirmed and have explained to you that there is already a separate species of humans with elongated skulls that were already populating the planet. So I'm going to push back on the inbreeding personally. The emerging picture is of an elite race within late Archaic early woodland societies who were often buried in the mounds and who represented a type of royalty. Among these interrelated groups were UPTs. The elitism is further evidenced by the presence of extensive child and infant burials in the tombs, often accompanied by the same exotic goods as the adults, including the shell beads and copper rings. Also, dental and bone anomalies have been used to establish a genetic connection between individuals at mound sites. Gigantic discoveries are often challenged with the generic statement that average Adena were between 5 to 6 and 5'11" feet tall. 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 11 inches feet tall. But this argument is conjecture of half-truth disguised as science. We are not concerned with the average stature of the Adena populace, but rather the irregular characteristics and often abnormally tall stature of their elite. And that's what I'm saying, elite. So here we have a picture of the Royal College of Surgeons, skeletons of Middle Chantant, a Sicilian dwarf, and O'Brien, the Irish giant. Now, in part one, we covered extensively Britain's origins and its ties to giants, and how Britain used to originally be called Albania, and it may have been named after a female giant. So I highly recommend you check out part one to learn more about that. But what was it? They're the elite, and here's the same the ongoing theme that I'm noticing here. It's the elite. It almost seems as if they were ruled by giants. And there are plenty of stories in the Indian stories discussing being oh my gosh. Sorry, I got distracted because I just learned about a plot point in a TV show. And yeah, I'm not watching that show. Anyways, sorry. Um Wow, sorry, I got completely distracted by that. What was it that now I gotta look back up what I was looking at. The elites. Okay, yeah. That they were, it almost gives you the impression that they were at some point ruled by that humans or these humanoids were ruled by giants, which in my opinion would be a fascinating thing to observe. But there seems to be this ongoing theme that I've noticed, whether it's with the Adena people here in North America or with the various tribes in Central America, this idea of being ruled over by elites with elongated skulls, or the descendants of these elites who do not have those genetic markers will purposely deform their heads to emulate those elites. And this continues to be the theme that we continue to see over and over again. And I think it's a fascinating little thing to note. And there are plenty of stories of giants, you know, hunting and eating, humans, and maybe at one point, humans were ruled over by giants, and maybe at one time they were also food for giants. I may have to look more into those stories, and perhaps we'll do a live stream talking about that. But let's get back into it. Besides the professional literature, so-called amateur archaeologists have also chronicled conclusive evidence of unique physical types with a great consistency to the discoveries of Drago and Webb. In 1908, Lewis Wallace Murray recorded that the Tygo Point in Pennsylvania remains of a skeleton of a man 6 or more feet in height beneath a cyst-like grave were found. The grave itself was encased and moved to the local museum, where the bones were studied by hundreds of people. Other skeletons from the same area were of unusual size. One judged from the length of the thigh bone to be 7 feet. In addition to these, Murray documents the examination of a large skeleton by a Professor Holbrook. Judging by the thigh bone, he must have been 7 feet tall. The skull was much larger than usual, very thick, the forehead usually receding, the top flattened. The jaws were extremely strong, full of large, perfect teeth. So, like I said, more and more evidence to prove this case. The following discovery of burials in her own flower garden, Murray embarked on an archaeological odyssey of her own. In 1921, she published an article for the American Anthropologist, noting that the femur, jaw, and teeth of one of the 7-foot skeletons was then still in the Tygon Point Museum. Also included are references to many skeletons between 6 and 7 feet tall, with photographs of artifacts, pottery, and in situ burial, one of the above 6-foot burials. The article also features a photograph of the Paul Scott collection, described as a multiplicity of small artifacts suggesting a race of pygmies, which included a miniature amulet of sinker stones. Regardless of the disparagement of amateurs, historians, antiquarians, the credentials of Webb, Snow, and Drago have never been brought into question. With so many researchers scrambling today to discover the irrefutable evidence of gigantic or otherwise anomalous beings to prove their existence, the authors questions why they not simply present the works of William S. Webb and Don Drago to anthropologists and, more importantly, their audiences. While the concept of a mysterious and undiscovered race may create an air of sensationalism, healthy for selling books and DVDs, we feel that it is far more relevant to demonstrate that the unique physical types were discovered by professionals all the way up through the 20th century, even after the institutionalized policy of denial, and yet the establishment continues to deny their own documented evidence of the truth. I'm going to repeat that. Yet the establishment continues to deny their own documented evidence and the truth. I mean, there you have it. And this is what I was saying. Why I was saying, there's always a bit of truth in legends, because you will have the mainstream media, the mainstream academia, whatever it may be, tell you, oh yeah, 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 tell you it's all lies, it's baloney. Yet you go and you look up their own archival evidence, and the truth is right there. So think about that, and I'm going to repeat it one more time, for our new people who just joined up on Rumble. Much love. Please hit that like button. Would be greatly appreciated. And I'm going to repeat it. Yet the establishment continues to deny their own documented evidence and the truth. I have presented with you plenty of irrefutable evidence. Evidence that you yourself can go online and look up. So I'm not lying to you guys. It's right there for you. So to me, I don't know, how else we can. I don't know what else to tell you guys. But if you want more evidence, I got one more article I'll pull up for you guys to further add to this. I mean, it's this is all, and think about it. These mounds, you can go and visit them. I mean, like we learned earlier, there's an entire town called Moundsville, and in some cases, some of these one of the archaeologists, and it was a guy who did the research on the West Virginia mound. He didn't even publish his findings until either half a what was it, like 2 decades later, 2 or 3 decades later, he published his findings on the giants in West Virginia, because he knew that there were policies and protocols already in place to discredit anyone who brings this evidence to the forefront. And guess what? When he first did this, excavated that mound, that was in the 30s, and he didn't release his findings until the 50s. I mean, so if you think censorship is a new idea, censorship has been going on for a very long time, and they first started with academia. To refresh anyone who isn't aware, the the um, the Smithsonian is a branch of the federal government, and the Smithsonian has been caught and found out for lying and destroying number of North American artifacts and sites on purpose. And when it comes to giants, go and call the Smithsonian. Go and call them on Monday. And go and call them and ask them if they have any giant bones in their warehouses or in their basement, and watch what happens when you do it. I dare you. Go ahead and do it. My four people over on Rumble, go ahead and do it. My four people over on YouTube, go ahead and do it. Call them up. Call up the Smithsonian on Monday and ask them if they have any giant bones in their warehouses. See what kind of response you get. But here, let's keep on going. We got one more article to check out. All right, let's do it. Now, this one was written July 2nd, 2015 by Jason and Sarah, and they wrote part 1 and part 2 of the articles we just read. Now, hold a tick. Hold on a second. Is this it? Hold on one second. Okay, you know what? All right, I made a little boo-boo, but I can actually fix it instantly. So let me fix this real quick. All right, here we go. Apologies. God damn it. Okay. So, yeah, again, like I said, the other article, this is part 1. I wanted to get this part first. So I made a mistake. But, in part 1 of this series, I covered a little bit of some of the mounds and earthworks of the Adena people and how incredibly advanced this culture and civilization was. So this article is titled Ancient Earthworks of North America Suggest Pre-Columbian European Contact. Long before the isolationist doctrine of the Smithsonian became an academic dogma, mounds and earthworks in America were routinely compared to those observed in Western Europe. This position was summed up by Stephen Denson Peete, founder of the American Antiquarian, in these passages from 1892. Quote, relics of the mound builders resemble those found in Great Britain and the north of Ireland, and even suggest the transmission of the same myths and symbols from the eastern to the western continent. End quote. Well, that's intriguing. Quote, the contact seemed to have produced a marvelous effect. It was not a decline from the Bronze Age which we'd see in these familiar symbols, but the effect of contact with European voyages in pre-Columbian times. Pre-Columbian discovery, in fact. The conclusion is startling, but this is the only way that we can account for the marvelous resemblances. End quote. Now, I'm not gonna get too into the weeds about the time, about the fact that, black people already inhabited North America, but they're not called black, they're called Aborigines. And if you want to know more about that, we lightly touch it on part one of this series. But if you want to deep dive into that, I highly recommend you check out Dan Calloway's YouTube channel or his books. If you want to get a deep dive into the real truth and origins and civilizations of North America as we are right now. Connection between the Serpent Mound of Ohio and ancient earthworks of Britain. Pete was also one of the first to connect the Portsmouth, Ohio earthworks with Avery in Wiltshire, England. Quote, "We think it can be proven that the most striking features of the work at Avebury are duplicated here. The sun symbol being embodied in the concentric circles on the Kentucky side, the phallic symbol on the horseshoe mounds upon the Ohio side, and the avenues of standing stones corresponded to the covered ways which connected the enclosures on the Kentucky side with that of the Ohio side." End quote. And here we have a John Aubrey sketch of the entire Avboro complex and the enormous processional avenues that once led to it. And this is massive. And even the design of this mound, it's, what's so incredible about ancient civilizations and the way their architecture, everything had a purpose, everything served meaning, and a meaning that was corresponding to their way of life, unlike now where the architecture is corresponding to the elites and their plans of conquest and subterfuge. And here we have another sketch of the Portsmouth, Ohio earthworks from ancient monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, in part one we covered that the giants pretty much lived all over Mississippi and like West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Like, really, I highly recommend you check out part one. Ohio's Great Serpent Mound was also compared to the serpent effigy at Loch Nell, Scotland, by both Frederick Ward Putnam and E.O. Randall. Quote, "It has, however, a counterpart in the Old World, in Great Britain. As is well known, there are frequent remains of a race of people similar to, if not identical with, the mound builders of America. In Scotland, there is a very remarkable and distinct serpent constituted of stone." So on the left, we have Serpent Mound of Loch Nell, taken from the Constance Cummings in the Hebrides, 1883. And on the right, we have Serpent Mound in Ohio. Now, I believe Serpent Mound in Ohio was featured in Graham Hancock's TV show, Ancient Apocalypse. Highly recommend, if you are really into this stuff, please check out the show. They have done everything they can to discredit and harm this man's career, livelihood, and reputation. Connections between Bell Beaker and the corded ware cultures of Europe and Adena culture of North America. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, the European cultures to which American earthworks were attributed were simply referred to as Druidic or Celtic. Today, these remains are ascribed to the descendants of the Bell Beaker and corded ware cultures, both named for their distinctive pottery of the Chalcothic and EBA. Recent genetic studies show that the cornerware culture originated with mass migrations of the Yamani culture from the Pontic steppe into northeastern Europe between 3000 and 28,000 BC. The Yamani culture buried their dead in pits beneath small mounds, sometimes covering the bones in red ochre, while quartered mounds demonstrate regional diversity and sophistication. For my white skinned brothers and sisters out there listening, if you are curious of the origins of your whiteness, look no further than to the Yamani culture. So I highly recommend, if you want to learn your lineage, your true lineage, research the Yamani culture. The Beaker people extended out of the Iberian Peninsula into Western Europe and the Mediterranean between 29,000 and 25,000 BC. They are credited with introducing metallurgy into Ireland and Britain. The Beaker people practiced individual burials inside the variety of round conical mounds, disc barrows, bell barrows, and bowl barrows, and continued the megalithic culture of their Neolithic forebears, including construction of large circular henges and the reuse of earthworks already built. And here we have a picture of an early Bronze Age barrow and enclosure. Boscombe Down, Amesbury. Beaker pottery was retrieved from the central burial and the barrow ditch. The appearance of these groups heralded a major genetic changeover in Europe, as new lineages associated with both cultures superseded those of the Neolithic period. Regional variations of the prolific culture package began to appear, including the Untais culture in Poland, Germany, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, 22,000 BC, and the Wessex culture in Britain, 2000 BC, continuing through the Bronze and into the Iron Age via the Tumulus, Urnfield, Hilversum, and Celtic cultures. Many of the North American earthworks compared with those across the Atlantic were built by the Adena people. Adena enclosures are circular embankments of earth with interior or exterior ditches featuring openings possibly referencing solar, lunar, or otherwise astrological events, usually located among mounds fields. The enclosures sometimes had timber circles incorporated into their designs. Now, the Serpent Mound in Ohio is a very advanced astrological calendar and clock. So, it further adds to the fact that the Adena people, these people were highly intelligent, highly sophisticated, and clearly very cultured. These structures are comparable to the Neolithic and Bronze Age henges. Some henges, such as Arbor Low, surrounded megalithic. Bless you, Pablo. It's my old Mexican Chihuahua. Stonehenge began life around 3100 BC as a simple circular enclosure with a ditch outside of the embankment. Left is Mount Horeb earthworks in Kentucky, USA, and the right is Goseck Circle in Germany. And you can pretty much see how distinctly similar they are in terms of design. Wow. And like I was saying earlier about an international worldwide civilization. Hold on, let me be right back. I gotta get something to drink. I have returned. Okay. So strong are the similarities of these works from both sides of the Atlantic that mainstream archaeologists occasionally study the European examples when interpreting the Adena versions. Adena mounds of North America resemble burial mounds of Europe. In 1883, the Smithsonian excavated 50 Adena mounds and surveyed 8 to 10 enclosures at Charleston, West Virginia. Among the earthworks were 2 circular henges with interior ditches flanking a large conical mound known as the Creel Mound, originally 30 to 40 feet high. And here we have a picture of the Creel Mound in Charleston. Enclosure number 1 was 250 feet to the northeast of the mound, while number 2 was 260 feet to the southwest of the tumulus. Both were 666 feet in circumference. Interesting number. With outer walls nearly 10 feet high at the time of the survey. Enclosure 1 had an opening at the south, while number 2 was open at the north. Here we have a sketch of Charleston, West Virginia earthworks, 5th annual report of the Bureau of Anthology, courtesy of archive.org. Enclosure number 1 is the large ring in the top half of the map, while enclosure number 2 is the large ring in the bottom half. According to A.R. Sines, who assisted the excavation of the Creel Mound, the central figure was a most powerful man. The distance from the spot where the heel bone was found to what was left of the skull was 6 feet, 8. The skull, wait, the left of the skull was, what was left of the skull was 6 feet, 8 to 3 to 4 inches. Okay, what? I'm a little confused on that one. The teeth were considerably larger than the teeth of any of the present generation. A portion of the skull was preserved by a copper headband. Hold on, the distance from the spot where the heel bone was found to that what was left of the skull. Oh, okay, was 6 feet. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my brain got a little bit of a fart there. At the center of the level area inside enclosure 1 was a small mound, 40 feet broad and 4 feet high, similar to a European disc barrow. The Druid barrow of Stukely belongs to the category and consists of one or more very small mounds with a circular bank surrounding them at some distance. So here we have a picture of long barrow mound, bell barrow mound, bull barrow mound, and then Druid barrow mound. These are massive. And to think none of these exist anymore. They're absolutely massive. Another mound near these works, known as the Wilson Mound, was 15 feet high and surrounded by circular enclosure, enclosing about 40 acres, having the ditch inside of the embankments, which were originally 5 or 6 feet high. This mound and enclosure had precisely the same design as a European Bronze Age bell barrow, described here by Bayer Gordon Chillade. Here, quote, here the mound is surrounded by a ditch or fosse with a bank outside it, a narrow belt of level ground, known as a berm, generally intervenes between the inner lip of the encircling fosse and the base of the mound proper. Now, a lot of these, they remind me of the Recock structure in North America. In Africa. If you ever get a chance, look up the Recock structure. And here we have a sketch of the designs and profiles of European barrows. A subsequent excavation of the Wilson Mound revealed a female skeleton with copper implements. There had been copper bands around the ankles and wrists and larger pieces of copper on each breast. Other Adena mounds of bell barrow design. The Biggs Mounds, Group D of the Portsmouth earthworks, was originally a conical mound 8 feet high with a 40-foot base, surrounded by an embankment of 5 feet high with an interior ditch of 25 feet across and 6 feet deep. A gateway in the wall opened to a causeway over the ditch, leading to the mound. The mound was much smaller at the next time of excavation in 1964. And here we have a sketch of the big site in Kentucky, a part of the Portsmouth earthworks from ancient monuments of the Mississippi Valley, courtesy of sidesnews.org. And so far they haven't explained how they built these mounds. Like, that's the one thing that I want to know is how are they able to build these things? Like, where did they yeah, like how did they build them? Like that to me is the real question. You know, it's no different than how they built the pyramids. This is uh this is definitely interesting to me. And here we have a sketch of the Koios Mound in Meretta. In 1859, T.A. Cheney made the following observations after excavating a mound inside of an enclosure in New York State. Quote, this embankment with an entrance or gateway upon the east side 30 feet in width has an entrée circumference of 170 feet. The mound, indeed, from the peculiar form of its construction, as well as from the character of its contents, as much resemblance to the barrows of the earliest Celtic origin in the Old World. End quote. Cheney's report states that a skeletal remains from the mounds were of very large size. Similarity between European and North American burials. European burials feature diverse types of burials. From William Greenwell, quote, sometimes the body, has been placed in a small box of stone, a cyst, at other times in a hollowed trunk of a tree, or in a grave sunk below the surface of the ground, and when a burnt body often in an urn. End quote. At Charleston, a pit beneath Mound 11 contained a skeleton fully 7 feet long. Inside, traces of a bark coffin, while the central burial and tenements and the cryol mound were all placed in bark coffins. Mound 19 contained a cyst of angular rocks 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet high, in which were fragments of a large human skeleton. At the Wright C&O and Robinson's Mounds in Kentucky, transportation and possible interment of cremations in pottery vessels has been documented. European scholars have also noted evidence of ancient colonization. After studying American mounds and earthworks, Dr. C. Adolf Zesterman published an article featuring the following passage in 1851, quote, these phenomenon, in my opinion, point to an intimate internal connexion for which I can find no other explanation other than a gradual migration of a portion of the human family from one part of the world to another, from one hemisphere to another. In short, I see it a colonization of America by means of immigration from Europe. Now, here's one thing he says: a portion of the human family. Now, that's a very interesting way to put it. A portion of the human family migrated. Now, if you know anything, and I don't mean to sound like ignorant, I apologize. Now, if you're aware of a lot of the elongated skulls that are found in Central America, they have red hair. And when we're done with part two, I highly recommend you check out part one, and see what the hair color the giants look like in North America. But what he said right there, a portion of the human family. Now, we always, we talk about, the various members of the ape family, or I should say of the primate family, the various members, of, the dolphin family. And here we have an individual, a doctor, calling it the human family. Now, that to me, further corroborates the notion of of various humanoid species within the human family. And I think that all of us should kind of take that into consideration. I'm just saying, like, it's right there in front of us. Now let's jump over to part two. Okay. Here we have part two, the Adena people and prehistoric colonization of North America. And again, this was written July 2nd by Jason and Sarah. European scholars have noted evidence of ancient civilization of North America. After studying American mounds and earthworks, Dr. C.A. Adolf Zesterman wrote in 1851, quote, I can find no other explanation other than a gradual migration of a portion of the human family from one part of the world to another, from one hemisphere to another. In short, I see in it a colonization of America by means of an immigration from Europe. And he's talking about the giants. The unique cranial features of Adena people shared with European Beaker people. William S. Webb and Charles Snow devoted considerable space to analysis of the large, higher, vaulted cranial of the Adena people of North America. Approximately 89%, 31 of 35 of the adult males, 92%, 22 of 24 of the adult females are brachiocephalic. The forehead is typically a prominent one, bored below to a quote, the forehead is typically a prominent one, bordered below by fairly sizable brow ridges. The root of the nose is of average proportions and continues on to a prominent convex bridge. That is one of prominent features of the face. The characteristics bulge of the upper and lower jaws, uh, alveolar and prognathism, is moderate in production. Usually, the cheekbones are not only of large size in themselves, but they have a forward and lateral presence. End quote. Snow felt that these traits, along with the great width of the bony chin, distinguish Adena from their predecessors and contemporaries. The Adena practiced artificial deformation of the occipital region, enhancing their large congenital features. Webb and Snow noted that the Adena skulls were the highest known in the world, with an average index of 89.5, while the deformed skulls reached as high as 0.8. Now, you see what I'm saying here? The distinction. You have the uh, now, and I said earlier that I don't really buy the deformation of these particular skulls personally. I just don't buy it. The characteristics of the Beaker people are virtually identical to Adena. Carlton Stephen Kuhns. Quote, where bell beaker burials are found in Central Europe, the skeletons are almost always of the same brachiocephalic type. End quote. Quote, the brow ridges are often heavy, the general ruggedness frequently greater. The faces are characteristically narrow, the orbits medium to high, the nasal skeletal high and aquiline, the occiput frequently flat. End quote. Quote, they form one of the rare groups in the world with a cranial length of 184 millimeters and an index of over 80 inches. End quote. Okay. William Boyd Dawkins described the Beaker's brachiocephalic crania as having strongly marked ridges high and broad, cheekbones and jaws presenting prognathism, while Burkitt described large teeth and a powerful lower jaw. The Beaker people practice the same type of occipital cranial deformation as Adena. There is also generally the occipital flattening, which may have been caused by the use of an unyielding cradle board. And in yesterday's live stream, we discussed how cranial deformation is something that's used, but not very often. And when it was, they were emulating their elites, which means they were emulating people who were born with elongated skulls. Quote, one unusual normal form of these crania is the brachiocephalic, and that decidedly so, and is also too obvious to need remark. But the mode of nursing would strengthen this brachiocephalicism. Now, if you notice here, well, actually, this is not one of the elongated skulls, so it's not going to work for this example. But you have this is a brachiocephalic beaker skull from the Natural History Review of 1862. Interesting. Giant skeletons. Besides these similarities, Neolithic and Bronze Age burials in Europe have yielded very large skeletons similar to those often found in Adena mounds. A truly gigantic specimen has been documented from Castellunal Lelez, southern France. In 1890, while excavating the Neolithic strata of Burial Mound, Georges de Laponge discovered the humerus tibia and femoral shaft of an individual he estimated to be between 11 and 12 feet tall. Lapon's conclusions were officially published in La Nature, Volume 18, number 888, along with an image of the bones with a normal size humerus. Quote, I think it's unnecessary to note that these bones were undeniably human despite their enormous size. The subject would have likely have been the size of 3 millimeter to 50. Significantly, these remains were studied by several of Lapon's contemporaries who agreed that these were indeed the bones of a giant human as reported in the August of 1890 issue of Popular Science. Think about that. It was published in Popular Science in 1890. All right, like I said, I was going to come here with the receipts. And here we have a bones of the giant of Casanuan in La Nature, 1890. In 1918, a surveyor at Surrey, England, the giant, oh God, it's a weird ad, nasty ad. The giant skeleton of a man of unusual stature was found in a perfect state of preservation. At the Woodyates Barrow Group in Wiltshire, Richard Colt Hare unearthed a large skeleton and another of a tall, stout man. In 1833, a skeletal laid at the full length within a rude cyst was discovered at Port Seton, Scotland. Measurements indicated the remains of a man nearly 7 feet high. The discovery of gigantic skeletons in several caves around the U.S. has been a popular subject in recent years. Less known are the documented finds on record from the Dark Zone in Europe. In the late 1800s, a series of unusual remains were found at the Monte Caves on the coast of Italy. The skeletons were the subject of an article in November of 1895 issue of Popular Science. According to the article, in 1884, a male skeleton of gigantic size, being 6 feet 9.5 inches in height, was found. In 1892, there were more skeletons were found, 2 of which measured 6 feet and 6 inches and a half, while the third was 6 feet 10 inches and a half, estimated to stand about 7 feet 4 inches while living. The crania are described as being of unusual size and thickness, while usually large orbital cavities and large teeth, the front nearly as large as molars. Skeletons were interred on their sides in a cyst of rude dolmen and were covered in red ochre. Artifacts included flint blades, shells, and deer teeth. Neolithic axes have also been found. So here we have a image of a gigantic skeleton in situ from the Menatone Caves. Popular Science, page 48, 1895. A similar cave burial was found at the Glamorganshire, Wales in 1824. According to W.B. Dawkins, a body of gigantic stature was found with the shell of ivory or the shell and ivory artifacts, a bone awl and covered in red ochre. Dating the Beaker and Adena cultures. One of the criteria commonly used in dismissing theoretical connections between the Beaker and Adena cultures is the discrepancy of dating. The initial spread of the Beaker people around Western Europe occurred by 24,000 BC, while genetic sources meant for public consumption, such as textbooks, websites, and interpretive pamphlets, placed the Adena culture at around 500 BC. However, the chronological discrepancy gradually vanishes with a review of the complete historical archaeological data. To begin with, we will trace a cultural legacy of the Zund Beaker cultural package from the down to the Iron Age. The Unetsi culture is divided into older and younger phases. The earlier phase lasts from about 22,000 BC to 2000 BC, while the younger phase uh, commences and lasts until 1800 to 1700 BC, with descendants formulate the tumulus and the Trezinic cultures. The tumulus culture phase lasts from roughly 1700 to 1200 BC before being succeeded in the early Iron Age by the Urnfield 1300 BC, the Hallstatt 800 to 500 BC, and La Tène cultures identified as the Keltol of ancient history. Historically, the cultural genealogy of the Beaker legacy, including tumulus and earthwork construction, continues in one form or another for over 2,000 years after the initial appearance in the Chalcolithic EBA. At the time, a review of radiocarbon dates pushes Adena further into the past. A radiocarbon date of 1200 to 1100 BC was attained from the lower level of the Tufener Mound in Ohio. Also from Ohio, the Clean, the Clean 1822 BC, Arthur James 803 to 115 BC, Munson Springs 833 and 764 BC, and William H. Davis 1405 to 60 BC. Mounds have yielded very earlier dates. A date of 1635 BC was attained from the lower level of the Cressup Mound in West Virginia, which Don Drago determined to be too early for Adena. The Dover Mound in Kentucky produced a date of around 780 BC from an upper tomb in the structure. The two Red Orchard tumuli at the Morton Mound group in Illinois have been dated to 1200 BC. Artifacts of the Red Orchard culture have noted as mixed with those of Adena at several mounds at the Kentucky River Range in Iowa. A circular ditch enclosure. Two mounds inside of the enclosure yielded dates of 600 and 800 BC, Mound 38 and Mound 39. In addition to the obvious cultural and artifact similarities, Red Orchard is considered to be ancestral to the Adena due to the brachiocephalic crania found in Red Orchard graves. And here we have an image of a brachiocephalic Red Orchard skull from Wisconsin archaeologists. Many flat grave cemeteries from the late Archaic period include the Adena or Adena-like remains. At the Indian River sites in New York State, cache blades, gorgets, copper implements, and red orchard were found in contexts dating to 2448 to 260 BC. This site was believed by Ritchie, Webb, and Drago to represent the prototype of the cult of the dead of the Glacial Kame, Red Orchard, Adena, and Hopewell cultures. At the Berry Hill site in Ohio, the brachiocephalic crania featuring occiput deformation was determined to belong to a group ancestral to Adena. Graves featured Red Orchard. So here we have an Adena-like crania from Berry Hill Cemetery, Ohio, from Pennsylvania archaeologists, and you can see the cranial, you can see the elongated skull. With regards to these flat grave complexes, we feel it to be significant that according to Mike Parker Pearson, In the Beaker culture, the dead were buried either under a round mounds or in flat burials with no earthen monument to mark them. It seems that the earlier burials around 24 BC were placed in flat graves. Author's emphasis. In West Virginia, early Adena, Fayette, thick, and half moon pottery has been found in contexts dating to 375 and 1290 BC, and in Ohio to 500 BC. Adena pottery is derived from the Vinvet I pottery, which some have actually described to a Western European origin. Thus, just as the legacy of zoned Beaker cultural package reaches across the span of 2000 BC to the dawn of the first millennia AD, damn. Adena-type mounds and earthworks, artifact types, and cultural traits extend back into the second and possible even the third millennia BC. Here, the source was in a likelihood associated with the Old Copper complex. Old Copper artifacts are strikingly similar to Bell Beaker types. And here we have a Bell Beaker Pamela points. So kind of like almost like a jade color. And then here we have North American Old Copper Rat-tail points and rat-tail points, and it looks very similar to the European version. Very similar. And then we have a Bell Beaker dagger. And then we have another Beaker dagger from Crania Britannia. And now here we have our North American Old Copper tanged points. Very similar. Today, diffusionism is still considered a cult archaeology, yet the possibility persists that an ancient culture did indeed cross the Atlantic millennia ago. Now, we do know that that is true, considering the fact that I just lost my train of thought. Oh, considering the fact that the Egyptians themselves have confirmed that they at one point traveled to North America. So, in regards to how these giants made their way to North America, that I don't know. I mean, I did. You're gonna find this crazy, but I did do a live stream covering the covering Celtic mercenaries that served in Egypt. So the idea and possibility of these civilizations traversing across the Atlantic Ocean is not out of the realm of possibility. I might even do a live stream covering one particular civilization that pretty much lived on the sea, and they just went around raiding various civilizations. So what we're seeing here in this information and all of this data and archaeological evidence is that there was, and maybe some of these civilizations are still alive and still exist and permeate our culture as it is today. If you want to know more about that, check out part 1 of this series, and near the end I show you something that's very eye-opening. But the point that I'm trying to make here, and that we've seen in this information and data, is that, North America was occupied for a very long time. It was busy. There were plenty of things going on here, and there was a one family of the human species that was occupying here. And I know that's something that's hard to grasp, but it's something that we got to think about and take in consideration. And while we're processing that, make sure you hit that like button and make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel. But every day, as I like to put it, the veil continues to be lifted and the truth is revealed to us. And most often than not, it's already been out there. And as we have learned here, that they have pretty much will ignore their own evidence. They ignore their own findings. So, we as individuals, we as free thinkers, we have to be very mindful of the fact that we really can't trust these institutions to have our best interests. Because they're, what do they gain from lying, or not even lying, from just not even acknowledging that giants lived on North America? Like, what happens if we implement that into our education system in American history? I don't understand what that will affect. They're not losing or gaining anything from discussing such history. But it just further adds to the fact that we really don't know the truth. That there is a hidden history, a true history. And I'm one of those people, and there are many others out there who are more than willing to go out there and look for that truth and bring it out for everyone to take a listen and make their own decisions. And this is something I said in Thursday's stream in part 1, is that these institutions in the government have no right determining how we perceive and what we determine our history to be. We as the citizens, we as the ancestors, we should have the right to determine and learn the truth of our history, no matter how fantastical or cruel or embarrassing it may be. They have no right to determine our history. They have no right to determine our origins. And I believe that for all of us as free individuals, as individuals who practice the art of living, who believe in informed consent, who believe in doing your own research, who believe and live a life that is in line with the morals and creeds of the type of person they wish to be, we don't play this game. We don't give in to we don't drink the Kool-Aid. We don't give in to the propaganda. And even with this information that I'm presenting you, it's nothing. I mean, for me personally, it's not groundbreaking news. But at the exact same time, it is groundbreaking news. The fact that we now have archaeological evidence to prove that at one point there was within the human family, a race of giants that inhabited North America and the UK and other areas of the world. We have that information. It's now documented. You can look up this information yourself. I just provided you with all that information from reading these articles. And even in the article itself, they acknowledge that the mainstream academia, they know this stuff to be true. They've documented it. They have the evidence, but they're not going to release it, as it goes against the narrative, goes against the propaganda, goes against the control, goes against dumbing us down. And it is disgusting to me that they feel that they have the right to determine our history, that they have the right to determine what we learn of our history. It's disgusting. And I think many of you out there agree with me. Shout out to my Rumble listeners right now. Much love to you guys. Hit that like button. Shout out to YouTube. I know you guys, you care about the information that you're given. You don't want to be constantly lied to and manipulated. So you look out alternative information. You look out alternative sources. You look for alternative individuals who are genuine and authentic and who are more than willing to give you the information free of bias. Sure, they might give you their own speculations and opinions, but they're going to give you the data and information and allow you to make up their own mind. They're just here to join you along that ride. And that's what I'm here for. Like I said in part 1, my whole thing is to challenge your foundational belief system. And that's what we have to do as individuals. Every single day we have to challenge our our foundational belief system. We have to challenge it. We have to constantly reassess it, improve it, because if we don't, we lose that aspect of what it means to be human. And then we end up falling victim to the hive mentality. And then we end up gulping down the Kool-Aid. And that is something that many of us have seen over the past several years with the pandemic and the elections and the culture war that's going on. We have to be even more vigilant and more self-aware of ourselves and the type of information that's influencing us. And that's what's really disgusting about the mainstream academia, is that they are influencing our belief system. They are influencing how we absorb information, how we research it. And they're suppressing the aspects of us that question that research, that go in, look up more into that stuff. And I know many of you out there are well aware of this. I'm not saying anything that isn't anything new. But it's crazy when it comes to topics such as giants and their actual existence. It's like we have to pretend like as if they're not real. When we have a number of verified professionals within their field confirming their existence, and at no point over the decades of their since their passing, no one has refuted their evidence. So it makes me wonder, okay, well then the mainstream academia, they know it's true, but they're not going to let anyone else out there put it out there that, yeah, this is true. They're not going to let any outside sources or researchers confirm any of this stuff. Why won't they? Well, because then if they were to put out, yeah, by the way, there was at one point a branch of the human family of giants that existed and populated North America and Europe. And here's the evidence to prove that. If they do that, then the average citizens are going to be like, wait a minute. So this entire time, you've been lying to me about the existence of giants? What else have you been lying to me about? And that's the last thing they want. Because then they know, okay, so now we admitted that we've been lying about the existence and of the human family of giants that inhabited the planet. And now we have to tell you the truth about everything else. And they don't want to do that. Because the moment they admit the truth to a lie that they have been telling us for centuries, decades, then everything else comes into question. And you're seeing that more now than ever with the increasement of censorship everywhere. And even the men who were studying these mounds and excavating and examining these giant bones, even they themselves were being censored by their own department. So, I don't know what to tell you guys other than we got to fight this storm. And we got to push for knowing the truth of our history, the origins of our version of humanity. Because if we don't push and advocate for that, if we don't fight for it, we're never gonna know. And we'll spend the rest of our days suppressed. And that's not right. So to all of you out there, I implore you that you stand firm in your morals and creeds. You stay true to yourself. You take time to research information and question things, and don't allow anyone to determine how you should live your life. And constantly be sure to challenge your foundational belief system and improve upon it and evolve it and strengthen it. And in the end, the whole goal is to become the best version of yourself by being better than yesterday. That is the goal of being an actualized individual. And it's harder even so now with the state of the world. And as we here try to unravel the truth of our history, as we continue to unravel the truth of the various families of humans that inhabited the planet, we have to now ask ourselves, how do we fit into this narrative? How do we fit into the true narrative of humanity, of America, of Europe, as opposed to the false narrative that's been plaguing us, that's been dumbing us down, that has been suppressing us, been harassing us, censoring us, you name it. That's why I call myself an essential realist. I deal in the essential reality. I do not deal in the false reality. And I implore many of you out there to break free from that false reality and embrace the essential reality. Embrace being the best version of yourself. Embrace being better than yesterday. Because we are our greatest weapons and we are our greatest weaknesses. And we should not allow these elites, we should not allow these oligarchs, we should not allow these government organizations to determine our way of life, to determine our identity, to determine our history, to determine our origins. We as free individuals, we need to fight against that. We need to prevent these corporate, pharmaceutical, industrial, military oligarchs from domesticating our individuality. They're doing that more so now than ever. Trying so hard to domesticate your way of life, your way of thinking, your way of being. And I do not stand for that. And I do not stand for within our academia. We can't. What's the point of sending your kids to schools nowadays? They're either trying to cut off their parts, trying to fuck them, trying to indoctrinate them. It's like and that's why here we are, talking about the lost race of giants, and now you're probably wondering, well, why the hell is he talking about indoctrination of kids and government? Because it all connects. It's all connecting. It all connects. That's my whole point in the end. Because then they determine your way of thinking, they determine the way you live, they determine the way you breathe. You're allowing them to domesticate your way of life. So for people who are willing to embrace alternative ideas and embrace the truth, you're deemed as a heretic. You're deemed as blasphemy. You're deemed as a threat. When all you're trying to do is be the best version of yourself and stay true. But here we are, researching and presenting data and evidence to prove the existence of giants that they themselves have documented. Yet we are the crazy ones. We're even more crazier when we present their own evidence to them. And that's what's funny about it. It's like, none of this is conspiracy. That's the funny thing about this. None of this is conspiracy. And if you've been here for a minute, or if you catch the replay, you're going to see that all of this information is documented, and you can look it up yourself. You can visit the sites where some of these giant bones are right now. I mean, here, I'll show you again, because I showed last stream, and I'll show you again. Here, look at that. Take a second and take that in. You tell me what that looks like to you. I can tell you that this image is from a video that was taken off of Twitter. I wish I had screen recorded the video, but at least I took a screenshot of the video. Look at the hand. You guys are smart people. Count how many digits does she have. You guys are intelligent people. You know the difference between Photoshop. You know the difference between CGI. If you've seen Disney films and Star Wars, you know the difference between good CGI and crappy CGI. And you look at that. You're gonna tell me that photo right there. Hey, thank you so much for the like. I really appreciate it. If you guys are enjoying this, please make sure to hit that like button. We got 8 over here on Rumble. Much love. Feel free to subscribe as well. Let's get this channel growing. But look at the hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I've seen 2 videos of this exact same female's hand. And in the video, it's not like it's a deformed finger. It's working. It does everything that your finger and my finger can do. So when I'm here saying that there probably was at one point in the human family giants that inhabited the earth, they may still be around, because some of them had double rows of teeth, and some of them had 6 toes and 6 fingers. And look at this one right here. And now, as we have recently learned, some of them also had elongated skulls. So, it all coincides. It all connects in the end. Because, you can look at these photos that I presented earlier, the images, the, reimaginings of what these skulls look like. But it's a lot different when you see a picture of a, 6-fingered hand. And look at the size of that hand. You guys can tell that's a massive hand. Imagine getting a right hook from that. And even in an old article from the 1800s that I read, it talked about a giant skull, and that the jaw width was large enough to bite into a coconut. Now, there are reasons why videos like that, if you're someone who goes on Twitter, every now and then you're going to scroll past a video and you're going to be like, wait, what? And then you save it or you go back to it and then the video is deleted. Now, all I'm saying for individuals out there is that with this kind of evidence out here, you need to really take time and really reevaluate your foundational belief system. I mean, the truth is out there for you. You just have to be willing to want to look into it. And I hope with the information and the data that I presented to everyone out there that you'll be more inclined to want to take a look into this stuff. Or you'll be more inclined to be more open with your belief system, be more willing to embrace alternative views and ideas that go against what you've been taught. And like I said, I'm here to challenge your foundational belief system. I'm here to give you guys that data, that information, and let you guys make up your own minds. I'll share my interpretation, I'll share my speculations, I'll share some of my beliefs and what I feel, but I'm not going to tell you what to think and feel. I'm not going to tell you how to believe. That's not what I'm here for. But my point is that we as individuals, we as free thinking individuals, we're highly intelligent, we're highly motivated, we want to know the truth. We just got to go out there and do it. And don't be afraid to speak out when you find the truth, when you're more than willing and able to let people know. And don't be afraid of the ridicule, don't be afraid of the groans and moans and the eye rolls, especially if you've done your research and you've done your homework and you know the truth. And all that matters is that you stay true to your morals and your creeds, and that you maintain a well-balanced ethics. And you also maintain a healthy mindset and a healthy physical mindset, or healthy physicality, I should say. Because all of those things also allow you to be able to digest and invest in your time into learning more about the truth of our world, the hidden history, the hidden narrative, as I like to put it. So I implore everyone out there, take that initiative. You don't have to spend copious amounts of times, hours into it, but I highly recommend, if there's something that you're personally interested in learning more about, that you've had questions about, take that time, look it up, research it. You may be surprised what you uncover. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Rōnin. All things, everything. If you are new to the channel and you've made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And make sure to follow me on social media. And leave a comment with your thoughts below. And please, feel free to share some positive, constructive criticism. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.